Hello everybody and welcome to the first episode of a brand new series, in which I read through, analyze, and present League's newest patch notes. In this episode, we'll take a closer look at patch 13.11 and determine the meta changes that will most likely happen because of it. This biweekly patch mostly focuses on tuning down quote-unquote counterable gameplay, but also introduces some delayed midscopes and mechanics which should have been added in the last patch. Before we dive into those though, let's take a closer look at the champion, item, and system changes first. Akali's play rate has been receding faster than my hairline, both in solo queue as well as in pro play. She now received a minor buff to her Q damage, causing her to deal 10 more magic damage flat at each rank. That doesn't sound like a lot, I know, but keep in mind that Akali has access to 2 Qs at level 5 and 3 Qs at level 9. This will make her laning phase a bit easier, as she's now able to trade more aggressively early on to look for quick kills or a CS advantage to enable her snowball to 1v9 the entire game. It also helps her clear waves just a bit better, even if her Q hardly deals any damage versus minions. I don't think that these buffs will affect the meta too much, at least not the professional one. The current state of mid lane is either all about pushing and roaming bot lane, and compared to an Ahri, Lissandra, Talia, or even Neeko now, Akali just gets pushed in and can't do much to counter it. Or it's all about playing versus a tank or bruiser, which Akali can't snowball against either. Amumu recently received buffs in patch 13.9, which have now been tuned down slightly, due to him terrorizing both high and low elo ranked games. His clear speed and early game damage output take a hit with the W changes. The base damage per tick now got lowered from 10 down to 7. Honestly, the thing that makes Amumu overpowered are his 2 charges on his Q and his ult in general. So I don't think this nerf will change a lot. Aphelios sees a lot of presence in pro play, which slowly starts to creep its way into up-led games as well. What first was picked up as a lane counter versus Jinx has now resulted in a meta where you either pick Jinx or Aphelios, and 4 champions that peel for both carries. This in turn results in predictable drafts and games, which isn't great for viewers that just want to see some high-level gameplay. Some of Aphelios' early laning strength got nerfed by lowering the bonus AD growth on his passive. At least that's what Riot says it does. This nerf is kinda similar to the one Jinx received in patch 13.9, and we all know that that didn't do jack to her win rate. So I expect about the same results with Aphelios. Sol is still dragging his balls across the faces of many mid laners during laning phase, even though he was designed to be fairly weak during the early game. The changes to Lost Chapter made his resource management way too easy, and with the additional buffs to Death Cap, his late game became a no more wait game for enemies. Get it? Because they tend to FF? I should shut the fuck. Anyways, Sol now received some nerfs to his E ability, which increased the mana cost in the early game, as well as lowers the AP scaling on the damage per tick by 1.25%. Sol is now less of an asshole, as this nerf will make stacking his passive just a bit harder. Ever since the major Azir changes back in patch 13.4 and 5, Azir has become a weaker Kayle. Almost every single patch until then has had an Azir change, to make him attractive again. Going into detail about this change is probably redundant, as it will be changed anyways in a later patch. No one plays Azir, especially in pro play if Riot keeps changing him. Feel free to pause the video if you want to read the patch notes, because I can't be asked to do it. Similarly to Aphelios, Jinx has been dominating both pro play and solo queue. She keeps getting nerfed, but she just doesn't care. Her attack speed growth is now on the chopping block, with it getting lowered by 0.36 per level. This is a revert to her buff back in 13.5, and I think that this might just be enough to finally lower her presence. I might be wrong though. Rek'Sai's strength dropped big time with the Prowler's Claw changes. Riot responded by shifting Rek'Sai from an assassin playstyle to a more bruiser-orientated one. At least it says so in the info text. The health scaling on her passive, as well as the lower refresh rate, is pretty good. The Q changes are neat as well, and the quality of life changes to a W are just the cherry on top. Unfortunately, almost nobody plays Rek'Sai, so I doubt that anything will change off of this. I'm sure that some one-trick players will abuse the shit out of this champion, but will it be the next Lee Sin? I doubt it. Renekton is not wrecking a ton in both solo queue and pro play right now. Renekton also profited off of the old Brawler's Claw and now lacks the additional burst and gap closing that it used to provide. That's why his E ability now has a 2-second lower cooldown flat, allowing him more trading opportunities during the laning phase and beyond. He also receives some buffs to his ult, which adds some scaling power to his non-Brawler's Claw build. I'm not sure if scaling is what you want to look for in Renekton, as he is more of a lane bully type of champion, but a buff is a buff, and honestly, the tank versus tank meta on top lane is starting to become stale. I'm not sure if it's enough to make him viable in the current meta, but we will definitely see a spike in his play rate, both in solo queue as well as in pro play. The only question is if it's a big one or a small one. Twisted Fate profited only slightly from the item changes in patch 13.10, which honestly surprised me, as I expected to see a lot more on-hit items building Twisted Fates. He's now able to throw more cool cards, as his W cooldown is now 6 seconds flat instead of 8-6 per point spent in his W. The lower cooldown on his W enables a lot more early game power, especially in skirmishes or duels. But to be fair, I'm not sure if this is the right approach to buff his kit. Honestly, there's only one card which Twisted Fate players actively play around the climb, and that one is their credit card. Except if you're a pro player. Then this buff might be nice. I guess we will just have to wait and see. Kalista's win rate dropped significantly in patch 13.10. She is now getting the life support she desperately needed, with changes to her base stats, passive, Q, and E abilities. She now has more base health, health regen, and health regen growth, which is a pretty solid buff. In return, she might have less base AD and AD growth per level now, but the increased AD scaling on her abilities will be noticeable through the currently overpowered ADC items. The only question is if she can scale to that point without inting. Probably not. Ardent Censer is giving too many people cancer. Heal supports were rocking the win rate charts during patch 13.10, causing e-girls to climb from gold all the way to diamond. The bonus attack speed is now getting lowered to 20% flat, instead of the scaling amount based on the target's level. The nerf to Ardent Censer is needed, but I doubt that it will stop players from building it, as the item itself isn't the main issue. It's more the fact that almost every single ADC is broken right now. Duskblade's new effect seemed pretty useless when compared to the other assassin items. Night Stalker, Duskblade's effect, now deals up to 5% more damage based on the target's missing health, with the maximum bonus health threshold getting increased by an additional 10% remaining health. The buff is nice, but I don't think that Duskblade itself was the issue. It's more that the other lethality options were stronger, and if you weren't building those, you would automatically be at a disadvantage. Echoes of Helia is new, and surprise surprise, too strong at what it does. Although it was designed to be a more offensive enchanter item, its healing output made it shine in almost any situation. That's why it now takes a hit in that regard, with 20 less damage and healing output flat at max level. The scaling is also getting adjusted, as the stats now change from level 6 onwards instead of level 1. This means that your champion level will be more important if you want to push an advantage through Echoes of Helia. Overall, a pretty good nerf. ADC items are broken, and the first one getting smacked is Galeforce. Champions other than ADCs started having too much fun building the item as well. The crit damage scaling on the active was absurdly high, and someone on the devs team must have forgotten that these champs have built-in critical strike chance, and giving them another high damage option, especially one so early on, is kinda fair. A 50% hit to the crit scaling will surely do the trick, but the 10% maximum execution damage feels kinda personal. Not that I mind. You might want to hit it again. Krakenslayer made crit building ADCs into APCs. Because dealing magic damage is a privilege nowadays, the damage type of Krakenslayer is now being changed into physical, but as compensation, it now has both a higher base damage and AD and AP scaling. Looks broken on paper, but keep in mind that almost every single champion gets armor per level. Oh, and tanks can finally feel safe again, stacking their pure armor builds. Moonstone was useless. I tried it, so I know. It now got a 5% buff to the scaling on its chain heal and single heal effect, which turns Moonstone from a D tier item into a C tier item. With the recent additions of marksman items, Navori just kinda got dropped. Almost no ADC cares about ability haste, as their job is to primarily right-click. Riot realized this and now changed not only its build path, but also its AD, ability haste, effect cooldown reduction, and mythic passive effect stats. I asked an ADC main about the new Navori, and all he said was, "What's that?" Runaan's Hurricane, similar to Krakenslayer, allowed ADCs to deal too much magic damage. This nerf is fairly simple but effective, as the on-hit damage just got chopped in half. Statikk Shiv has returned, but it's now for mages? Statikk hasn't seen much play, aside in those wacky Veigar builds, so in order to make it sexier for others, the base damage it deals gets increased by 20 flat, and the damage modifier against minions is increased by an additional 30%. I think the wave clear that it provides is fine, but the item is just weird in general right now. It has the stats for marksmen, the scaling for mages, and the impact for split pushers. Doesn't really surprise me that no one wants to buy it. Stormrazor was so busted during the laning phase that the majority of ADCs built it as their first item. It now has 5 AD less, and a little bit less AD scaling, and flat damage on its effect. Not sure why you want to change the scaling of the item effect as well, as the early game is all about base damage, but honestly, anything that makes ADC mains write a salty post on Reddit is a win for me. The hardest play for champions that built Youmuu's Ghostblade in patch 13.10 was probably spelling the item correctly in the search bar. Youmuu's was busted, and allowed the fair and fun one-shot type playstyle to return. Thank you, I hate it. Youmuu's now has 5 less ability haste, and a little less lethality at max stacks. Also, its stack generation gets a hit as well, as you now need 55 distance instead of the prior 45 one. Still sounds busted to me, but we'll just have to look and see. Now, let's get into the main dish of this patch. Ivern finally receives his midscope update. Oh wait, it's just classified as a buff now? I think Riot probably puts more effort into writing these changes than into the actual champion. Ivern's Q can now be recast to jump directly to the target, while Ivern and his allies can issue an attack command to their basic attack's range distance. It also has 50 more cast range, and its cooldown is halved when used on non-epic monsters. Ivern's W passive bonus damage on hit when exiting the bush for 3 seconds now applies to all allied champions. It deals a little bit of base damage plus 10% of Ivern's AP. The brush vision duration is also increased by 5 seconds, and the duration of the brush just brushing around somewhere is increased from 30 up to a maximum of 45 seconds, or until you lose vision inside of them. Also visual changes, but those are: his E now renews if the shield detonates without hitting any enemies. His ultimate is finally getting some much needed love, with increased stats in attack range, HP regen, move speed, and attack speed. Daisy also deals more damage with her slam now, but in return loses some of her bonus attack speed. These buffs mostly act as a balance change to the buff sharing mechanic, which I'll get into later. Ivern used to be the only one who could share his buffs, but, you know, can't have shit in Detroit. Truth be told, these changes are nice, and make Ivern feel good to play again, until someone buys Serpent's Fang. Then Ivern isn't a champion anymore. Ever since the major hit after her release, Rell has been struggling to find her way back into the hearts of engaged supports. There's a dev blog that goes in depth about the thoughts behind her, but I don't really care about what it says. All that I know is that if you can't please a certain lane with a champion, just move said champion on another and hope that it'll do better there. Rell is now being shifted towards the jungle with major changes to her kit and damage output. And yes, the changes listed here are already adjusted to the hotfix, as Riot realized their mistake only 2 days after launch. Let's start with her base stats. Her base attack speed is increased quite massively, alongside her health regen growth, and base armor. In return, she receives slight nerfs to her attack speed growth per level and movement speed. These changes, except for maybe the reduced movement speed, are fine and complement Rell's early all-in aggressive playstyle. Rell's passive is now stackable instead of a flat percentage. What used to be 10% armor and magic resistance shred flat is now 3% per attack or ability connected on a target, up to a maximum of 5 stacks. The passive duration is now a second longer as well, and doesn't get removed immediately if the victim dies prematurely. To balance out the buff, Rell's passive now steals less armor and magic resistance against targets with barely any resistance, deals no more magic damage on hit, and doesn't get any more free stats off of attacking a minion. The stacking mechanic also disables the old effect, where hitting a new target refresh the passive duration on all targets. The changes to her passive make her better versus team comps, which mainly consists of tanks, but weaker versus team comps that mainly consist of squishy champions. Rell's Q now stuns all targets hit for 0.75 seconds. It also deals 300% more damage to jungle camps now, and when Rell casts a Q, she moves 100 units forward to get in position to stab a bitch. She has a 10% higher AP scaling on her damage as well, and no, AP Rell isn't viable. Her Q also no longer has a damage fall off after the first target was hit. In return, she now no longer heals herself or her allies with her Q, has a reduced spell range in front of her, but a slightly increased one behind her, a very high cooldown increase, deals less magic damage flat, and has an increased cast time. Sounds interesting, but these changes might need some time getting used to. Rell's W changes finally make her a champion again after getting dismounted. She now gains bonus attack speed, bonus attack range, more bonus armor and magic resistance, and no more movement speed cap when no pony. In return, she now has a percentage movement speed reduction of 10% instead of a flat one, which nerfs her early game, deals less damage, now slides 15% less after landing, has a 10% smaller AoE radius upon impact, and a reduced jump range of 20%. Her E ability got completely reworked. Rell now passively gains move speed while mounted at levels 1 to 13, reduced by 50% when she's in combat. The new active now reads, Rell and an ally charge, gaining ramping movement speed over 3 seconds. This is doubled towards enemies or each other. Additionally, Rell's next attack or shattering strike explodes in an area for a little bit of damage. Rell will be receiving some nerfs in patch 13.12. I guess they went a little overboard with this one. So yeah, next topic. Buff sharing has finally been introduced. The war between junglers and mid laners and junglers and ADCs is now over.
Is it possible to sleep with a man's penis all night long?
When a jungler now either kills red or blue while their smite is fully upgraded, they will receive the camp's buff, but additionally, a buff wisp will be dropped at the camp's spawn point. An ally can pick it up by walking within the wisp's radius within 1 minute of the camp dying, before it disappears. If a player that is not a jungler kills red or blue, but the jungler's smite is fully upgraded, then a buff wisp will still drop, which will be only visible to the allied jungler, but it also just remains for 1 minute. More red and blue buffs means less downtime, which in turn means more action, but we have yet to experience the impact this might have. It's a nice change, which is needed to make League a less toxic game, as now there's no more debating in mid-game whether or not the jungler should take the red buff or give it to a 0-5 ADC who is down 40 CS. In other news, Pride Month is here, and with it, a few rewards which you can get. Overall, it's a bit underwhelming in my opinion, as the rewards are sorta meh. Riot could have just released Nudir or another one of those pool party skins the community liked, but nope, just 2 very basic emotes. There's also a secondary minor event centered around Worlds 2022. This means that the DRX skins are finally out. A solid skin line in my opinion. I really like the color scheme. And last but not least, here is also a list with the changes to champions in ARAM and bug fixes. I hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know what you think of this format in the description. Should I add/remove things, or try my hand at other types of videos? I'm always open for suggestions and criticism, so if you have any, please feel free to let me know. The Rune video is also coming soon. There's just a small delay due to my work, uni, family, and personal matters, but I'm trying to spend as much time on the video as I can. Anyways, I don't want to hold you up any longer than I already have. See you in the next video.